Sir William Whiteway was a dominant political leader in pre-Confederation Newfoundland and Labrador. Of the 30 years he served in the House of Assembly, he spent 14 as Premier. It was a record no one would beat until Joseph Smallwood took office after Confederation. William Whiteway was born in Devon, England in 1828. His family had deep ties to the Newfoundland fish trade. So when Whiteway was just 15 years old, he immigrated to St. John's to work in a merchant firm. But the young Whiteway soon developed an interest in law. He decided to leave the fish trade to article at a local law firm. Whiteway was called to the Newfoundland bar in 1852 and started his own law practice. Among his clients was Charles Fox Bennett. Bennett was a wealthy businessman and politician who encouraged Whiteway to enter politics. With Bennett's backing, Whiteway became the Conservative candidate in an 1858 by-election in the Twillingate-Fogo district. Whiteway won that election and held on to his seat in the next 3 general elections, in 1859, 1861, and 1865. But Whiteway's popularity sagged in the late 1860s when he became a vocal supporter of Confederation with Canada. The issue was so controversial that it created deep divisions within both the Conservative and Liberal parties. It also fractured Whiteway's relationship with Bennett, who became the leader of the new anti-Confederate party. Confederation became the focus of the 1869 general election. Bennett's anti-Confederates ran an effective campaign that resonated with voters. They won the election by a landslide, 21 seats to 9. For the first time in a decade, Whiteway had lost his seat in the House of Assembly. He would have to wait another 4 years to run in the next general election. In the meantime, Whiteway abandoned his support for Confederation and announced that he would never again bring it up unless the public demanded it. It was a wise move, and Whiteway won the 1873 general election, this time in the district of Trinity Bay. His political star was once again on the rise. 1 year later, Premier Frank Carter appointed Whiteway to his cabinet as Solicitor General. Whiteway earned widespread acclaim in this role when he argued before the Halifax Fisheries Commission in 1877. The commission was investigating a dispute over North Atlantic fishing rights between the United States and Britain. Whiteway's arguments earned Newfoundland $1 million in compensation and won Whiteway a knighthood from Britain. When Carter resigned from politics in 1878, Whiteway replaced him as the leader of the Conservative Party and Premier of Newfoundland and Labrador. That same year, he led the Conservatives to a resounding victory in the colony's 13th general election, winning 21 of the House of Assembly's 31 seats. Whiteway had built his campaign on a policy of progress. He promised to diversify Newfoundland and Labrador's economy away from the fisheries by developing land-based industries like mining and agriculture. To do this, he argued that a trans-island railway must be built. The railway would modernize the colony and provide easier access to timber and mineral resources in the island's interior and on its west coast. It was an ambitious project that would take years to complete and cost millions of dollars. The railway had been the centerpiece of Whiteway's 1878 election campaign, and it would dominate the rest of his political career. But there were significant hurdles to overcome. Among the largest was the French shore. It had been created in 1713 with the ratification of the Treaty of Utrecht. The treaty granted France fishing rights on the Newfoundland coast between Cape Bonavista and Point Riche, an area that had been frequented by French fishers since the early 16th century. The boundary changed in 1783 to include much of the west coast. Whiteway wanted to change the terms of the agreement to allow his government unrestricted access to the shore so it could complete the Trans-Island Railroad and access the West Coast's mineral and timber resources. But because Newfoundland and Labrador was a British colony, only London could negotiate this change with France. Britain was reluctant to act because it didn't want to stir up tensions with its neighbor to the south. Whiteway scaled down his plan and instead decided to build a railway from St. John's to Halls Bay with a branch to Harbour Grace. The new route avoided the problem of the French shore by ending at Halls Bay instead of St. George's, and the branch line between St. John's and Harbour Grace made sound economic sense because it would service the most populous part of the island. Whiteway decided to lay down a narrow gauge rail instead of the more expensive standard gauge. The move saved money in the short term, but it would create significant problems in the long term by limiting the amount of freight that could be moved over the line. The government's cost-cutting railway plan came with an estimated price tag of $4 million, far below the $8.5 million needed to build the longer standard gauge line to St. George's. As surveyors investigated the new route, heated debates sprang up around the railway. Wealthy merchants generally opposed the project. They argued that the tremendous costs of building and maintaining a railway would plunge the colony into debilitating and long-term debt. Those in favor predicted that the railway would create jobs and help to diversify the economy. By supporting the railway, Whiteway positioned himself as the champion of the working class. It was an effective strategy that helped Whiteway win the 1878 election. He awarded the contract to build the railway to Albert Blackman. Blackman was a New York lawyer who headed a syndicate of investors. Construction began in the summer of 1881, and by the end of the year, 16 kilometers of track had been laid in St. John's. 400 workers were employed on the project, and more jobs were opening rapidly. Whiteway's popularity remained high, especially among working-class voters, and he led his Conservative Party to another majority government in the 1882 general election. But his second term as premier was not a smooth one. Blackman and his syndicate soon began to run out of money. In 1884, they halted railway construction and declared bankruptcy. A struggling fishery further weakened Whiteway's grip on power, as did a strong opposition led by Robert Thorburn. Thorburn opposed the railway and accused Whiteway of neglecting the fishery. More trouble came in 1883 after rising tensions between Catholics and Protestants sparked a riot in Harbour Grace on Boxing Day. 5 men died in the clash, and another 17 were wounded. Whiteway's attempts at reconciliation alienated several powerful Protestant members of his government who resigned their seats to join Thorburn. Whiteway stepped down from the premiership in 1885 and did not run in that year's general election. He decided to take a break from politics, but returned 4 years later for the 1889 general election. Whiteway was now leader of the Liberal Party. His promise to resume construction of the railway resonated with voters, who once again elected him as premier. This time, Whiteway hired the Scottish engineer Robert Reid to finish the railway, and work progressed much more smoothly under his leadership than it had under the Blackman syndicate. Railway construction remained popular among the electorate, and Whiteway won the next general election in 1893. But scandal once again reared its head when the opposition Conservatives accused Whiteway and several other Liberals of bribery and corruption, claiming they had misused public money to buy votes. The scandal ended with the resignation of Whiteway's Liberal government and the installation of a Conservative minority government led by Augustus Goodrich. But that administration was also short-lived and stepped down after the 1894 bank crash plunged the colony into unprecedented economic hardship. The Liberals formed another government, and Whiteway again became premier in 1895. But his political clout had been dramatically weakened by past scandals and a struggling economy. Whiteway watched his popularity evaporate over the next 2 years, and he lost the 1897 election. Ironically, it was the same year that saw the completion of the Trans-Island Railway, which had been the driving force of Whiteway's political life. Whiteway ran for office one more time in the 1904 general election. The man who had led the colony for 14 years came last in his riding. He would never again sit in the House of Assembly. Sir William Whiteway died in St. John's on June 24, 1908. He was 80 years old.